Good evening, and assemble for our All Avengers episode of Having a Drink with Mink. As always, I'm your host, Jarvis Mink. I hope you have a nice beverage on hand. I know that I do. I've always been a nut for action figures. In fact, when I briefly stopped collecting comics, I went all in on little plastic people, specifically the Earth's Mightiest heroes. Nearly all of these toys were released under the Marvel Legends banner, some from Toy Biz, others from Hasbro. I'll make note of where they're from on screen, in case you'd like a few for yourself. Let's get to it. Hank Pym has always been my favorite Avenger, in spite of some ups and downs, so to speak. However, this is the Scott Lang incarnation of the character. Whoever it's meant to be, Toy Biz did a good job replicating his iconic look. The helmet is probably the figure's high point, with its comic-accurate sculpt and proportions. Ants sold separately. Dane Whitman is the scientist ancestor of the original Black Knight, cursed to wield the legendary ebony blade, its dark magic corrupting him with each good deed that he performs. He subbed for Pym as Resident Genius during Roger Stern's 1980s run, and was on hand for the epic Masters of Evil storyline. Sadly, this is the more modern version of the character, and while he's cool, he's not, I have bat wings on the side of my helmet cool. Black Widow is the one figure in my collection where I default to the movie version, and why the heck wouldn't I? While the real Scarlett Johansson has yet to accept my dinner invitation, this little cutie is happy to tag along in my shirt pocket whenever I hit my favorite Chinese buffet. She doesn't even judge me when I go back for thirds. Well, not much, anyway. Coming to us from all the way back in Marvel Legends Series 1, this Captain America has yet to be equaled when it comes to head sculpt. It just screams classic Cap. From his no-nonsense expression to the little wings on the side of his head, this is an example of getting it right the first time. Whether wooing S.H.I.E.L.D. agents or smashing Hydra, this guy is up for any challenge. Old Winghead is the one who put in a word for Black Panther to join the assemblers in his place way back in Avengers 52. Here's the Toy Biz version of the character, whose dynamic sculpt is marred by the figure's inexplicable texture. It's a strange choice, to be sure. For the life of me, I've never seen BP portrayed as bumpy. At least the nasty-looking claws are fun to pose. Remember that giant man Build-A-Figure I talked about earlier? Well, here he is. You had to buy 10 separate figures to get all the pieces needed to build old Hank, including 2 versions of Wolverine, which was absurd, and they were insanely hard to track down, but I'm happy to finally have High Pockets on my membership roster. He looks great with whatever version of the Wasp you happen to have, although I always skew classic. For the selective among you, there are both 6-inch versions, as well as smaller figures which illustrate her size-changing powers. While the Wasp is known for her multitude of costumes, no one changes outfits more than Iron Man. He's the Cher of the Marvel Universe. The toy companies haven't been shy about producing all these different looks either. From the original gray prototype all the way to the latest bleeding-edge incarnation, one company or another has done them all. And while today's overly teched-out version leaves me cold, the original drunken millionaire barreling around in a handmade suit and saving the world between romantic trysts, I'm all in. Let's not forget sometimes Avenger, the Hulk. He's what industry insiders call toyetic, in that the character possesses an appeal that effortlessly translates from page to plastic. Old Greenskin has been the beneficiary of dozens of figures, ranging from the original gray prototype, all the way up to this terrifying zombie version. In spite of his basic nature, it seems that there are no shortage of ways to represent the Jade Giant in plastic form. Like it or not, and I don't, Spider-Man is an Avenger. This doesn't work for me on multiple levels. It'd take an entire video to explain. Suffice to say, Webhead is most compelling when swinging alone. The best Spidey stories have always been about Peter Parker being smart enough to think his way out of a situation, no matter how perilous. Having a Thunder God as backup kind of diminishes that agency. Speaking of, if you're going to have plastic Avengers, then Thor is an essential addition. And if you're thinking that this thunder god bears a resemblance to a certain ex-governor of California, you wouldn't be alone. There's a lot of Arnie in that face. Kind of makes you wonder what those Marvel movies would have been like if made in the 1980s. So what if CGI hadn't been invented yet? Put Schwarzenegger in a blonde wig, give him a hammer to hit stuff, and film whatever happens. If Thor is here, can Loki be far behind? I mean, without him, there'd be no Avengers in the first place. This figure popped up for a minute at retail and then vanished, which is a shame. No, he's not the reedy little schemer from the classic comics. Here he's bigger and more dire looking. Remember, Loki was an offspring of the Frost Giants, so this made for a compelling, if rarely seen, representation. Red Skull is a classic Marvel villain primarily known for antagonizing Captain America. Heck, he's been doing it since the Second World War. I'm thinking it's kind of like Willie Nelson, with music being the thing keeping him alive, only with the skull, it's an undying hatred of freedom, liberty, and most of all, some skinny kid from Brooklyn who manages to defeat his evil schemes at every turn with nothing but pluck, determination, and a trash can lid. Ultron is always bad news, as we will shortly see. Being a robot, Pym's Folly has seen a lot of redesigns, but it's this Bronze Age version that hits the hardest from a visual standpoint. From the little spikes on his shoulders to that unmistakable metallic maw, this is all Ultron. It's as if a George Perez drawing gained sentience and leapt off the printed page. Don't believe me? Stay tuned. Batroc the Leaper is primarily a Captain America villain, but he's such a fun figure to have in the collection, I had to include him. The Savate Master and world-class mustache aficionado doesn't have a lot of sculpted detail, but what's there is serviceable. It's the head sculpt that counts, and this figure nails it. Originally known as the Human Top, perpetual loser Dave Cannon eventually got a nifty metal suit and some wrist-mounted buzzsaws and started calling himself Whirlwind. Oh sure, he still lost every fight, but at least he no longer suffered the indignity of being called the Human Top. You gotta take those little wins where you find them. Didn't see your favorite Avenger here? Well, let me know in the comments section below. With the appetizer out of the way, let's get to the meat of the show, that being old comics. These are all Avengers issues, badly needed upgrades to replace my well-worn copies. We begin with Avengers number 31 and Never Bug a Giant. Although Hank Pym is already pretty bugged, being stuck at 10 feet tall. In search of a cure for his condition, he travels to South America of all places, ending up in this subterranean realm. There was a lot happening underground in the Silver Age, what with all the hidden cities, eternal flames, and betrayal. Oh, there was plenty of that, as our oversized Avenger soon discovers. It'll take the rest of the team to pull his fat out of the fire here, although he's still wearing the big pajamas at the end of the issue. I don't have many autograph comics, but I did manage to land this one, embellished by none other than Avengers artist supreme, George Perez. And while the book is a dish rag condition-wise, it's still cool to have a personalized artifact from the creator himself. On the inside, Iron Man's nose. Why did he have one? Well, it was the 70s, and taking that helmet off every time just to do a line was impractical, I guess. And it's the Squadron Supreme, back when the concept of characters from alternate worlds was still kind of fun and not just an excuse to play weird with the toys. There's 3 pages of pure action culminating in the mock Justice League taking down Earth's premier heroes. Not sure that I buy that Whizzer is able to carry Iron Man like a bag of laundry over one shoulder. Heck, I threw my arm out opening a can of peaches last week, so this strains credibility. Even for me. When Kirby came back to Marvel in the mid-1970s, he drew a lot of covers, this being one of my favorites. It's just damn creepy, with long-dead Avenger Wonder Man rising from the murky New Orleans swamp. Things happen a little differently inside, with Simon Williams bursting out of a crate during an Avengers press conference. He accuses the Vision of stealing his mind, and then collapses. Williams' inert frame is hustled inside for study, where Iron Man makes this wry observation. Very sensitive, Tony. Shellhead is interrupted by the stirring Williams, who repeats the same cryptic phrase over and over again. The other Avengers follow his seemingly somnambulistic self into the bayou where things only get thornier. There are orgiastic cultists, reanimated corpses, and a guy dressed like a chicken. Pretty wild for a mainstream comic. Remember when Marvel tried to make the Wizard a thing? I'm surprised he didn't make a bigger splash. In spite of a stream of appearances, he just kind of trickled off. All jokes aside, I get it. The Golden Age character in a modern setting. It's territory later writers like Jeff Jones would mine far more effectively in books like Justice Society of America. The only problem was the Avengers already had a man out of time, and his name didn't make even the most jaded adult snicker. Combine that with the Wizard's yellow tights and the incontinence jokes write themselves. How about this Sal Buscema crowd scene? You could always count on a colorful cast of characters to fill those in-between panels in a Marvel book. The reincarnated Wonder Man knocks them aside like bowling pins. I think the Avengers would keep track of their recently revived members just to avoid such potential PR nightmares. Then it's Avengers 54 and Atuma.
It's not Atuma.
Okay, it's mostly some guy named Tyrak. It seems that when the Vision attempts to discard that pesky serpent crown by dropping it in the ocean, some rogue Atlanteans almost immediately find it. Isn't there a storage locker at the mansion for stuff like this? Then, not Atuma, shows up to lay the smack down. While he does pretty well for a second stringer, taking most of the team out, Cap gives this epic speech that could only come from a Bronze Age Marvel. Sargasso? Language, Steve. Avengers 155 is a continuation of the events of the previous issue, only now Dr. Freakin' Doom is involved. Writer Jerry Conway seems to be having a great time here, putting the team through its paces, providing little character moments for each member while simultaneously propelling the story forward. George Perez continues to grow with every issue, his pencils taking on a confident, assured quality that really matches the tone of the book. Here's the first of many shots of incapacitated Avengers, which seemed to be a thing at the time. And look, even Namor the Submariner shows up to add a little Atlantean funk to the proceedings. In issue 158, we witness the uneasy relationship between the Vision and Wonder Man finally go sideways. Seemingly back for good, Simon has been helping the Avengers, but his familiarity with the Scarlet Witch leads to this unmistakably Sal Buscema panel. But that's only the beginning, as we discover Viz is brimming with resentment, and Simon is the perfect recipient for his icy, synthezoid emotions. In spite of the potential dangers, Iron Man decides to let him fight it out. After all, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. He could use a drink. Elsewhere, an experiment in harnessing matter from a collapsed star results in the creation of Graviton. Not sure what the excuse is for that suit, but the assemblers make the scene to put this fashion victim down for a nap. Only Beardy proves tougher than expected, his gravity-based powers being more than a match for the team. A cliffhanger carries over into the next issue with our second incapacitated Avengers image, this time stuck to a wall like color forms. Remember those? Graviton does. And hey, it's Thor. He hasn't been around much lately, so that's a welcome surprise. He does his bit to wear the villain down, calling the lightning and whatnot. An escaped Iron Man takes this opportunity to press the attack, weakening his foe so the rest of the team can get free and save the floating city before it crashes to the unexpected Earth below. If that sounds familiar, it's because they stole bits of it for the movie Avengers 2. Sun's getting really low, big guy. 161 is a real high point, in spite of the havoc it eventually caused. We begin with Ant-Man hiding in the ducts of Avengers Mansion, observing the team as they return from events of the previous issue. It's clear something is wrong with Hank, as he doesn't recognize his teammates. Instead of hanging back, Pym attacks, and while the other Avengers are understandably reticent to hurt their teammate, Pym has no such reservations and overwhelms them. It's only the timely appearance of the Wasp that turns the tide. She swats Pym with a bio-sting, knocking him out so we can get to the bottom of this latest mystery. Here's Marvel really splashing it around. This was back when Kirby Crackle was like 30 cents a pound, so you could afford to do panels like this. And no wonder Hank ended up the way he did. His brains have been scrambled more than the Big Slam breakfast at Denny's. Just then, other Hank appears, gasping out a warning. Ultron is here, and he's got Janet. This is enough to get through Hank's muddled mind, but then the robot attacks, bursting through the mansion walls. He lays into the team with an unexpected ferocity, with new weapons that make short work of the heroes. Worse still, his encephalo beam appears to kill the Beast, Captain America, and Scarlet Witch, while rendering the Vision inert. How will the team survive this one? Issue 162 sees the after effects of Ultron's assault, with the seemingly dead heroes carted off to the morgue. Thor appears, bypassing the chaos, only things aren't much better inside the mansion. Iron Man is being recharged after his armor's brutal draining, as the team scrambles to recover and locate the now missing Hank and Janet Pym. Turns out, they're here, in Ultron's secret lab, but what the heck is going on? Turns out Tin Machine struck out on all the dating sites, so he's decided to just build himself a girlfriend. Even worse, he's stealing Jan's essence to do so. Not sure about the science behind it, but apparently you gotta be nude for it to work. Writer Jim Shooter seems to have a problem with the Pyms. It's one thing to tell a story where something bad happens to a character, or they make a poor choice and have to deal with the consequences, but Shooter seems determined to work over Marvel's swingin'est couple. Yeah, sure, the Pyms have always had their problems, but there's a point where evolution needs to take place, and story and circumstance move forward. To double down and decide that dysfunction is the couple's primary trait and make them the team's resident cautionary tale basically wrecked the characters from this point forward. Mr. Shooter can make all the excuses he wants after the fact, but the proof is right here, in front of our faces. Ultron proves tougher than ever, repelling the twin assault of Thor and Wonder Man. It's only some outside-of-the-box thinking from Avengers leader Iron Man that turns the tide, when he grabs hold of Jocasta and threatens to blow her cybernetic brain out. And while the malevolent robot initially seems unfazed, in the end, Ultron relents, telling the Avengers how to reverse the life-draining process before escaping into the night. Would Iron Man have actually done it? Hard to say, Billy. Hard to say. Issue 165 sees an old enemy gain startling new abilities in Hammer of Vengeance. A rogue scientist strips the power from 3 Avengers villains, transferring it to Magia crime boss Count Nefaria. Now superhuman, the Count takes the fight to the Avengers' doorstep, where he proceeds to hammer the recently revived Captain America and company. The team throws everything in the mansion's kitchen sink at him, but Nefaria is simply too much to handle. A shame that Vision, still recovering in the tank after being zapped by Ultron a few issues back, as the others could really use a hand. In fact, Nefaria has just dropped a building on them. Only Wonder Man is still standing. Convinced he's the only one left alive, Simon attacks, but Nefaria just rolls with his increasingly desperate blows. Suddenly, the summer sky cracks wide with a devastating peal of thunder as Thor joins the battle. Of all the Avengers, it's the Odin son Nefaria dreads the most. He's struck head-on by Mjolnir, then takes a solid right to the jaw. Remarkably, the Count not only weathers this assault, but returns it, using heat vision on his noble foe. Thor, however, is already spinning his hammer, calling on the power of the storm. Only Nefaria catches it. Odds blood. Nearby, the other Avengers are alive thanks to a hex bubble from Wanda. Captain America, too woozy to fight, gives his shield to Simon. Quite the honor. And hey, look who's awake. It's the Vision, after a service call from the 2 Hanks. Instead of trying to fight Nefaria, the Avenger simply rises a mile into the air, increases his density, and drops on the Count like a bomb. And that's pretty much the last time we see Count Nefaria. Avengers 168 sees our heroes returning from an adventure in deep space alongside the Guardians of the Galaxy. The proper Guardians, if you forgot what they were like. Before everyone can go out for shawarma, the team responds to an alarm at the mansion. Is it Kang? Loki? A Tuma?
It's not a tumor.
No, in fact, it's this guy. Henry Gyrich is a government appointee, now in charge of the Avengers. This rubs more than a few of the team the wrong way. The Avengers is an elite organization, above the meddling of petty bureaucrats. In fact, Cap takes a swat at Iron Man, things get so tense. Okay, it's not Civil War, but pretty edgy for the time. Meanwhile, Starhawk, disguised as a lady, discovers the enemy that he has traveled back in time to battle. And battle they do, two godlike beings engaged in a cosmic conflict in a small residential neighborhood just outside of New York City. Quirky, a bit, but the stakes are clearly high, as the enemy, or Michael as he prefers to be known, murders Starhawk, then brings him back to life with no knowledge of the battle that has just transpired. Heady stuff, and just the first salvo in a greater battle yet to come. I showed a picture of Wonder Man to my mom and said, I want to start dressing just like that. She broke it to me as gently as possible that they don't sell red safari jackets at Hill's department store. Still a bit of a blow. The Pims have returned, and they brought Jocasta with them, mostly because Jan didn't want it in the house. Gee, I wonder why. And because it's a comic book, Jocasta abruptly wakes from her seemingly inert state and tries to escape. To the Avengers' surprise, the robot is far from defenseless, zapping both the Vision and the Beast. Well, she's Ultron's girlfriend, so it's to be expected she's going to have a few self-defense mechanisms. And it looks like Simon's had enough of this nonsense. He's going to trash that chrome broad before she kills someone. And how does that go? To be expected, really. Fans could be forgiven for thinking Wonder Man was ironically named. Between his constant self-doubt and misgivings and his inability to get a mark in the winning column, and Simon was probably beginning to wish that he'd stayed dead. Shards of Crystal Doom features this wild cover. At one point, Wanda was relatively stable, so imagery like this could be worrisome to an impressionable young reader. Inside, the Avengers are chasing Jocasta through the streets of New York City. Only the robot has managed to catch a lift with Sister Eucalypta, and they're headed northbound on Riverside Drive. You know, if you want to recreate this issue for your next LARPing session, cut away to this fitting room in a trendy clothing store, and Carol Danvers is trying on a new housecoat or something. My, what a well-shaped figure she has. Well, get your word balloon out of the way, lady. Let us be the judge of that. Carol suits up in short order and joins the other Avengers on the street. A precognitive flash has led her to the team, and she's willing to help. Better watch her, though. As the Beast says, she's tricky. Having gotten a bead on Jocasta using Iron Man's armor, the Avengers track the fleeing robot to this convent. Before a cybernetic sequel to Sister Act can break out, Ultron reveals himself. Only, for once, the Avengers are prepared for the conflict and attack their robot foe. Meanwhile, Wanda wakes up in a crystal chamber shown on the cover. The walls begin to shift, disorienting her to the point where she's unable to use her hex power. Abruptly, she plunges through the floor and into a raging whirlpool, although whether this is real or just an illusion is hard to say. Back at the scene of the battle, the now subdued Avengers can only watch in horror as Ultron revives his bride, only to be rejected. Dames, huh? What are you gonna do? And that's it. Thank you for joining us for tonight's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm your host, Jason Mink. If you did, let us know in the comments section below. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until the next time, cheers.